My name's Pat Michaels. I'm the Chief Learning Mechanic here at Great Circle Learning, and we are here to kind of talk about building better guidebooks. For those who were at the session on the 7th, where we're kind of talking about crafting exceptional participant guides for participant guides, one of the things we talked about at the end, there was kind of 5 steps to go through, which we just can't do justice to any of these items. I mean, we could dive into each one of these much deeper through different sessions. But today's kind of, we're diving deeper into those 5 items. And so what we're going to be looking at is today, we're going to be going through the 5 of them, right? Talking about mapping your course structure to your learning objectives and supporting your lessons with relevant material, as well as, how do we determine, which role our items going in are supporting, talk about consistency, about the right tools, and then we'll open it up for question and answers. Those are the high level things we're going to talk about. Obviously there is that Q&A session at the end, but at any point, if you have questions as we're going, please, put them into chat or speak up and we can go through them at the same time. So again, I am recording this, so we'll be able to, I'll get this, edited down and put up onto YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow, but definitively by Monday. But let's jump in and, before we actually start into mapping our learning objectives, we kind of just need to set the stage a little bit. Right, and so one of the things I'd like to do is, kind of think about the question of why do we do training, right? Why are we going through and building instructor-led training or building e-learning or virtual training? What's the purpose of it? And I think when we start looking at it at that level, it actually helps us when it comes to the structure and mapping our objectives. So at the most simplistic level, we probably could go even more simple, but at a simplistic way of looking at it, we are trying to get our learners, our participants, to a specific goal. Right? After doing needs analysis and all this, we've got an issue, we've done our needs analysis, we figured out here's what we need to fix. Here's the overall goal we need to achieve. Right? Which then gives us, our learners are at a specific location, in the steps. They could be at different locations in terms of obviously physical locations or just maybe capability or ability levels. So how do we get them from where they're currently at to the goal that we're trying to achieve, to resolve whatever issue the organization has? This is where we start kind of building out steps, right? The simplest terms, we build a series of steps or objectives that our learners can start, moving their way up and closer to that goal, where eventually when they reach the goal, they can celebrate and they kind of get that crown, right? They've got the, they've achieved the reward after getting the goal, right? So that's the reason I bring that up is I just want to kind of get our mindset in that realm of we're trying to achieve a goal, right? The whole purpose of training is we're trying to resolve some item or multiple items, and there is an X marks a spot, which is the goal, the overall goal we're trying to achieve. So with that, we can actually now jump into our first place, which is the mapping structure to our objectives, right? What do I mean about mapping structures to our objectives? So let's actually go in and just look at a sample to kind of get an idea. So here is, a sample, fake facilitator guide, right? So again, we're building guidebooks. We're trying to make it simple. We're trying to build better ones. So what goes into a guidebook? Within a guidebook, it is building out a training program, right? This is the program. In this case, we're looking at instructor-led or virtual instructor-led. In that guidebook is, the steps to walk us through as a facilitator, as a producer, to successfully run this course. So the guidebook contains our training program. Our training program is going to be built up of terminology that we use as modules, right? So these are the main steps. If you're thinking of an outline, right, these are the actual, these are our Roman numerals within that outline. So we've got our modules. Our modules are built up of lessons, right? So these are going to be the smaller steps within the modules to get us up. And then within our lessons, we're broken out into deliverable actions, right? We're going to be saying this, we're going to be running this activity, we're going to be showing this slide, right? So that in general is the idea of what we're building out in a guidebook. Now, if we look at this in another way, and again, put your head into, we're trying to use those objectives, right? And it's obviously, there's a whole other session of how do we write good learning objectives. But we're trying to take those objectives that we would have built out and now map it into our course structure. So if we look at these modules, our modules really should become the terminal objectives that we're building out. So terminal objective 1 becomes our module 1, right? Enabling objective 1.1 within terminal objective is our first lesson, and so on. So we're using our terminal and enabling objectives to set that structure of our guidebook. That doesn't mean necessarily that our module name is like the actual objective, right? Because that would just be a weird name, right? To understand or to define the key characteristics of XYZ isn't the best module name, right? But that's what we're trying to achieve with it. All right. So coming back into here, once we've kind of built out our structure, right? We've got our outline, and we're going to dive deeper into this. But I want to point out, when you're building your training, I like to think of it like a burger or a sandwich, whatever you want. But it's broken down into 3 pieces. We've got the good stuff, right? The burger, the lettuce, the cheese, the bacon, all that stuff. That's the actual training that's happening. But we're sandwiching it, or putting it between 2 buns of an introduction and a conclusion. Whether it's a short course, whether it's a long course, we're always having a beginning portion where we're going to tell them what we're going to tell them. We're going to have an end where we're going to basically tell them what we told them. So we're going to kind of sandwich things in between. And so what this would look like is, in this case, this is a multi-module example, but it could be a smaller one. We've got an introduction module with a welcome lesson. And that welcome lesson, welcome people into the class. Maybe we're doing an icebreaker activity. We're asking them a question about, why are you excited to be in the training? For those who did the session at the beginning of the month on the learner's journey, if you remember, we talked about one of the pages in this guidebook, kind of capturing, why are we doing this training, and then giving them information about, letting them capture why are you excited for this training, right? Maybe when we're doing the pre-work or as people are coming into the classroom, you have them start answering those questions. So when we do our icebreaker activity, we can say, hey, Amanda, why don't you tell me why are you excited about being in this training class or this training session, right? After we've already kind of talked about why the organization thinks it's important for you. But now we have a better chance to get engagement. Those type of things would happen up in that welcome lesson, right? But then we get into our modules and our lessons, right? But again, our modules really are going to be our terminal objectives. Our lessons are our enabling objectives. And we start just using those objectives to lay out the whole structure of our course. One thing that kind of comes up, especially, for those who use who build out design documents, sometimes as we're building out a design document, we don't put our objectives in the best teaching order or best facilitation order. It's just like, we need to achieve this, and we need to achieve this, and we need to do this. At some point, you do have to kind of sit down and figure out, like, this, this needs to be taught before this, where this, the third item could go in any location, and you kind of determine that really in an outline or something like that, or in the design document, so that when we bring it into the course, it's basically, top to bottom, following that structure, we've got our course in. So if you can map your objectives to your learning objectives into your course structure, it is very, the more you do it, it becomes simpler and simpler. And now we've got a defined way to build out our training. Again, bring it all back into your burger, right? So we've got our course, introduction, we've got a conclusion. And if you do that, I promise you, your learners will gladly pay you Tuesday for your training today, for those who remember Popeye. All right. Who's got questions so far? All right. Again, questions, don't be afraid to put them into chat or ask. I'm happy to go through anything, or we can cover them at the Q&A session at the end. All right. So after we've kind of, start the idea of mapping out our objectives, we want to look at, how do we then support the material within those lessons, because lessons really are where the actual training's happening. The modules or terminal objectives, that's the high level, or that's, it's the main goal we're trying to achieve, or to get to the overall overarching goal, if that makes sense. But the lessons, this is where we're actually going to get into the meat and potatoes, or burger and cheese and bacon, however you want to look at, whatever food analogy you want to use. It's lunchtime, I'm sorry, of how we want to go about this. But let's jump back to our very simplistic way of looking at this, right? So in this case, objective 1 through objective 4, these are our terminal objectives, right? Taking us to that overarching goal. But within those objectives, and this is kind of what we just talked about, again, at a more simplistic level, within those objectives are our enabling objectives, right? So within objective 3, in this case, we've got 3 enabling objectives. So those enabling objectives are the smaller steps that take us to the larger step, which then those larger steps take us to the overall goal. We still need smaller steps, smaller actions within those enabling objectives or lessons to get us to these. So these are, think about, we build out slides. Each slide and their corresponding notes and actions, those are, that's a smaller step within that enabling objective or lesson, right? Same like the key points that we're going to make, or what we're going to say, or the activities that we're going to run, or the role plays, or the this or the that. All those individual actions that we want our facilitators to be doing and to be taking our learners through fall within those lessons. So we're kind of compartmentalizing each item into individual steps to a larger step, and those larger steps go to the much bigger step. Those bigger steps take us to the overall goal, right? Basically, one of the things you're going to find is we want to be doing stuff consistently, and amazingly enough, that is one of those items we're going to be talking about. But we want to go through and be able to consistently do these things so that it's easier for us to do it. And we'll talk more about that during the consistency level. So that idea of breaking things down, let's actually see it kind of in action. Let me pull up. Here is a sample book. So this is just, here's a sample guidebook. I can zoom this in so we can see it a little bit better. But so in this case, we're inside of a lesson called What is a Smart Goal? And so in here, right, we're breaking it down into chunks. This is a facilitator guide, so it's, right, a facilitator guide really should be an at-a-glance document where the facilitator can be up in front of the camera or up in front of the class and not face first reading the material or winging it off the top of their head. Right? We want them to where they can glance down, get the information, and be back up in front of the class. But in this, this sample, if we were to look, right, we've got things like, the slides that are going to be showing, then they're going to be saying something, we're going to be showing some slides, and now we're going to be asking some questions, and then making a key point, and then saying stuff, or we're laying this out in a way that the facilitator can walk through the class, whether it's your main facilitator or they're out sick or they got promoted and someone else has to do it. We want consistency across multiple facilitators, multiple locations, multiple sessions. Your guidebook's the way you're going to be able to do that. So in this case, right, if I get this out of kind of the look, and we'll talk a little bit, about this is one of our pieces of software that helps you do this easily, but I can start going in and adding in items like, right, a computer activity or a flip chart or key points or a process that we want to do or a role play. I can go through and insert in any of these items where my cursor was located and then just start putting in the text that I needed someone to work through, right? And maybe even break it out where I could then go through and, give them a note like walk through as the participants play the game, right? I could go through and give notes. So in this case, I'm using, the layout, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a little bit, but, I use, in this case, column 2 of my layout for the information that's being put into the class, right? Here's the game that we're doing. We're going to talk about the instructions. As a facilitator, I'm putting that into the classroom, where what I have over in column 3 is information I need the facilitator or producer to pay attention to, but they don't necessarily need it to deliver it to the class. That's kind of how I have this guidebook set up with. But the idea is we're taking, what are the items that we need to be doing in this, in our guidebook within what is a SMART goal? What are the relevant pieces of information that help me get my learner from wherever they currently are to understanding what is a SMART goal to then, the larger piece of creating a goal-centric environment or whatever your overall program is. But you're able to break it down into smaller chunks that your facilitators can go through. Questions on this at the moment? Okay. Which brings us to, wrong one, this one. How do we determine what goes into a guidebook? Right? And so this is, for me, every time I'm putting something into a facilitator guide or a participant guide, I'm asking the question, what role does this support in my facilitator guide or in my participant guide? So, kind of to determine this, we kind of need to understand the roles that are available or what they're out there. So in a facilitator guide, two main roles a facilitator guide plays is an in-the-moment reference aid, right? And I think this is what everyone thinks about. Say this, do this, show this slide, play this video, all those type of things. The actions that the facilitator needs to be doing or the producer needs to be doing during the training session. But just as important, if not maybe even a little bit more important, is the role of a study guide. So a facilitator guide is there so that the facilitator, so that the producer can be prepared to lead the class. What do they need to have on hand? What do they eat? What do they need to make sure that the learners have done prior to getting into the class? All of those items we need to consider. So when I'm putting something into a facilitator guide, I'm asking, does this support the role of in-the-moment reference aid? Does it support the role of study guide? Or is it both? Or is it neither, right? So it's basically one of 4 options. It's just 1, just 2, or 1 and 2, or 0, right? 0 meaning it doesn't support anything. So that's for a facilitator guide. If you're building out a participant guide, the 2 main roles, it's a training supplement, right? Think of this as, turn to page 37 for the activity that we're going to be going through, or on page 17 are the steps to walk you through the computer activity that they're going to be doing, right? So it's items that they're referencing during the training that help support or supplements what they're doing in the classroom or online. The second item, which I think is the one that we really miss out on, and it's kind of what we delved into a lot more during the session on the learner's journey, was the post-course resource. For a participant guide, we want to give them material that they can go back to either physically or digitally that supports the training and helps them move them even further steps forward, right? So it's just not the slides, or just not the slides and some note blocks, but it's got key points, it's got additional references and resources. So when we're building out, choosing what goes into our guidebook, in a participant guide, we're asking, does this support the role of a training supplement? Does it support the role of a post-course resource? Does it do both? Does it do neither? And what I want to qualify, you can put stuff into your guidebooks that don't support either one of those roles. I like to call it my 90% rule. So when I say always, I mean 90% of the time. So 90% of the time, if I put something into the guidebook, it's got to support one or both of those. There's going to be times where it doesn't, you maybe put something into the guidebook that doesn't really fall into one of those categories, which is fine. If you've got too much of that, though, now our guidebook has kind of gone off track. Or maybe we haven't actually paid as much attention to what we're putting in there, and it does actually fit one of those roles, but we haven't really thought about it. And so maybe we're not using that in the best manner. Or maybe it's just truly extraneous and we should just take it out. But by asking ourselves that question, we can really streamline that process, right? We've got, in any type of training, like today, I think I set it up for an hour. We could go for, much longer than that. We could go shorter than that. But we can never cover everything, right? So we need to set it up like, here's the key points that we're going to make, right? And these are the most vital things that we're going to have. After that, here's some additional information, right? So this is the idea. By asking these questions, we can determine 100% have to have it, 50%, maybe we can get rid of it. This shouldn't be in here at all, right? You can kind of set your own categories of where the things fall into this. But the main thing is be thinking about that. Questions here. All right. Which brings us to I guess this was our fourth point. Yeah, number 4. So about being consistent. All right, so consistency is going to help us in multiple ways, right? And we can, consistently how we lay things out on the page, all of these things, what fonts, what sizes, all of those things. The more we can do it, the more it makes it easy for us. But let's kind of look at this in terms of value. What value do you get out of being consistent in developing? And these aren't all of them. I kind of chose some of the higher ones that I think really fall into this. But when we're consistent in what we do, it's going to help us save time, right? The more consistent we are in mapping our structure to our learning objectives, I don't have to think about this now. Obviously there's time I have to work and kind of, obviously I'm building up my objectives, spending time to think about the best teaching order of those. But after that, I know exactly how that fits into my guidebook, right? So now my whole table of contents, my whole structure's in place. I don't have to think about it. It's going to save me time, right? And obviously in the beginning, when you first start doing things, right, there is the learning curve, so it's kind of going to go up for a little bit, and then you're going to see the time value reduce greatly as you do this more and more. It's going to simplify your process, right? So we're going to save time. the more you've got a defined process and you're consistently using it, you're going to find ways to make that more and more advantageous to you, simplifying it, which once it's simplified is then going to give you the ability to save more time. In being consistent, we can reduce our risk, right? So obviously, depending on what we're training, our risks can be super high, right? You're training people, creating training on nuclear energy and how to handle those type of things and technical aspects. There's a whole bunch of risk, right? You're teaching soft skills on how to handle customer complaints, a little bit less risk, but the more we can consistently do things and we create systems and processes that fit within this, our level of risk is reduced because we've kind of set parameters for everything that we're doing. We're going to kind of talk about a little bit about how that fits into setting these parameters and things when we get into the next section about tools. But our overall quality is going to increase. When you kind of get out of your own way and start using having a process, having the tools, the structure that you're going to use, you don't have to put time and energy thinking about that, which now frees up time and energy and brain power to go into the actual training material. Does it make sense to teach this versus this? And you can flip-flop. Or maybe we should flush this out, and you've got the thought power to do it because you're now not worrying about why is my image that I put in on page 2 versus where it was on page 1, or what font do I use? Currently, and I'd say most people building out training, instructor-led training, spend about 50% of their time on non-training related materials. It's spent on things like, what font do I use? What size do I use? What color? I just made a change and that image is floating on page 2 is now over on page 7. It's all on the actual manipulation of the material on the page and formatting and layout, and not on, does this activity make sense, or should we do, this activity as well? Or does a role play work here, or should we flush out this case study instead? Right? So the more you can get yourself out of the way of the weeds of building out guidebooks and just get a process in place that you can use, it's going to just make your overall process easier. You actually may hear my dogs in a moment. I think my kids are coming in from school. It was a half day today. But, all right. How can consistency help us elevate uniqueness? We talked about, kind of laying 90% of the time we're always doing specific things, right? Humans crave consistency. Think about when you drive to work or you go to the grocery store. My guess is you probably drive the same route, barring accidents, right? Or you try to park in the same general location in the grocery store whenever possible because it's easier to return the cart over here. Or when you go into the grocery store, you kind of walk around. My guess is you have a specific pattern. Like you start on the left-hand side and you work your way through, and then you do the colds at the end. And then do the outside rim at the end so the colds are cold. Or you do the outside first and then down the aisles. But if you kind of think about it, you're going to probably have been doing things consistently, whether you like it or not, or whether you're thinking about it or not. So that, like I said, humans crave consistency. Now, which is what this allows, is the other thing humans like is surprise. So if we're consistently doing things, that item that we need to specifically have stand out on the page, because we've kind of laid things out a specific way each and every time, when we lay something out differently or we present it differently, it stands out. It's that surprise factor that humans like. So the more we can be consistent, when we need to put in something a little bit different, it gives it that uniqueness, which makes it stand out. If we build stuff willy-nilly, which is a technical term, if you build it willy-nilly all the time, guidebook 1 is laid out this way. Guidebook 2 is strictly the notes section of PowerPoint. Guidebook 3, there are no notes. Everything is all over the place. and nothing's consistent and nothing stands out. So you're going to have reduced success with those programs because things are all over the place. So consistency gives us the ability, when we need to choose that 10% of the time for things to kind of fall outside our realm, it makes them stand out and it makes them more important. And in this whole process, it's going to help us help us reduce frustration, anxiety. As we get more comfortable doing things, we have less concern over, the nitty-gritty, and we can worry about the material itself. So our frustrations level will be reduced as well. Questions here? All right. Which is going to bring us to the last main item that I wanted to go through. And then we're going to kind of show you kind of how one of our tools can kind of wrap all of these things together. But when we talk about using the right tools, what we mean by this is finding a way to get the right items to meet what we're trying to do. So tools can obviously be physical tools, it can be software tools, it can be a whole series of things. So the way I break it down, and kind of we'll start at the bottom and go through them. In terms of hardware, right? Let's say you have to build, you're going to be delivering training virtually, right? You're going through things like this, right? Like, what's the type of computer you're using? Do you have a webcam? What are you using for sound, right? How do you go through and showcase things? Are we using, do we use a Stream Deck like I use to make it easy to switch from, different items, jump to different scenes, right? So what are we using to make our lives easy in terms of hardware? In terms of software, right? In terms of, if we use a virtual instructor, like, do you use Zoom? Do you use Teams? In my case, I add in the layer of a tool called OBS, which allows me to jump around and do different scenes, like where I can, showcase, show my screen, bring my slides next to me, bring up my desktop, all of these type of things. That's a piece of software that I use to make this process easier. Right? So software is going to help you. In terms of instructor-led training or virtual instructor-led training for building guidebooks, right? This could be Adobe Acrobat, it can be Microsoft Word, it could be our tool LeaderGuide Pro, which sits within Microsoft Word, right? It could be Canva. But what are the different tools that you're using for this? Once you kind of have your tools, in terms of what type of software tools, I should say, now we need to start thinking about what are the pieces that are going to go into a guidebook from that software level, right? If you think back to the Learning Journey one, where we talked about the essential elements of a participant book, right, where we had the cover page and the acknowledgements page, right, the overviews, your modules, your lessons, all of those things. Those are individual templates in the guidebook, right? So notice I said templates, not template. One of the big things I see happen, especially when people are doing this on their own, right, not using any other tools other than, let's say, Word, they build a single template, and I'll put template in quotation marks. They build a single template for their entire guidebook. And what will end up happening when you go that route is your first guidebook looks like one way, your second guidebook looks different. A third person or a second person's using that guide, that same template, they've got a completely different look, because you make a single change into that one overall template, it can quickly divert this way. Where if you use multiple templates, right, like you've got a cover page template, and then I bring in that cover page into my guidebook, right, I can make changes to that cover page and nothing else changes because it's just within that cover page template, right, where I could make changes to my getting started template with those pieces but it's not going to have any, those changes won't affect anything else that I could be using, just based off, because I'm compartmentalizing, which also makes it easy to say, I'm building out a guidebook and I don't need, it's a 30-minute lunch and learn. I need a cover page, I need a table of contents, and I need to get into the material. Great, you can do that, and you can just pull those individual pieces together, where on that much longer, you have that 2-week new hire orientation, right? There's a lot more pieces that are going to go into that, so you can pull in the different pieces for those based off those templates. Within your templates, you're really going to be looking at formatting and layout. Yep, Sherry, you're 100% right. So much time is on fonts and alignment, right? So, which is where this was a great segue, so thank you. In formatting and layout, how do we lay things out so that items are easy to be worked with, right? And let me jump over. I'm going to jump back over here into my LeaderGuide here. Right, for us, using our tool, which again, I'll showcase a little bit of it in just a few moments, we're going to go through and we use tables to lay things out, right? Whether it's a 2-column document or a 3-column document, right? So if we look here, right, this is 2-column, above it's 3-column. Column 1 for us, visual cues. We use visual cues to drive actions so that our facilitators can, again, at a glance, look down, see what they're going to be doing, right? And I'm not saying you need to use icons like we do, or the icons we do, but they see the icon for a slide. All right, I see that. I know I need to click to go to the next slide, right? I don't need to start typing in, click to go to the next slide. This icon represents that, and they'll know what to do. Right? When they see the icon for, the say here, all right, I know I need to get something across. I'm saying something, and then it's tied to a headline, say something like, all right, I now know with just a glance, I got to get the next information across in general. I can use my own words, or something like say exactly, or say verbatim, right? You're doing training on the Miranda rights, right? Those need to be said verbatim. So the headline tied to the icon can drive actions. So the way we format, the way we lay things out will make it easy, right? So that's where using my templates, in these cases the templates built within LeaderGuide Pro, I don't need to worry about where I'm laying things out on the page. It's already set up this way. Like, I'm going to make choices of, do I want my slide images in column 2, column 3, or column 1? But those small changes don't make any difference on all the other items I'm going through. So the way I set up my formatting and layout within my templates is going to make my training more consistent. It's layered into the overall structure that's being built out. So now it's just a much simplified process, which saves time, saves money, reduces frustration and anxiety. So again, if you're doing this on your own, there is going to be a time investment kind of figuring out your whole system, building this and how we're going to bring stuff in, or you can find tools out there to help you along that way. Last thing by tools, I would think about your style guides. Think about, what fonts, what sizes, what colors, all the branding stuff that is specifically needed for your organization. Or if let's say I call them the single shingle shop, like you build out, you've got multiple customers, you're building out training for Kroger and you're building out training for, Publix and Stop and Shop and whatever different grocery chains. Like when you build the training and you want to make it so it's easy, so it's got their colors or their icons or their fonts, how do you set up your templates to work that, or the style guides to work those type of things? So tools can mean multiple things, but again, in terms for the actual the software tools that I use to make building out guidebooks easier, Number one is LeaderGuide Pro, which is our tool, which is an add-in to Microsoft Word. So I guess Word would be second. I use Adobe Acrobat really for working within when I start bringing stuff over to PDFs, and then for taking participant guides from where they can a printable version where people can physically write to an editable PDF with fields that they can type into. I'm using Acrobat for items like that. For building out visuals, Canva, PowerPoint's my main one. PowerPoint, Canva, Adobe Illustrator. Those are the main ones I use for that. If you're looking for tools for subject matter experts, we can kind of talk about that at another point, or just reach out to me, let me know. But that's, those are the big things in terms of, the tools. So let me open this up for any questions at the moment, and then I can go in after this. I'll go in and kind of show you, real simple. I know we're about 40 minutes in, and I would, I'd love to give you this, be in less, maybe about 5-10 minutes of kind of showcasing what LeaderGuide Pro can do. But what type of questions do you have for me at the moment? What was the name of the presentation hardware? It's called a Stream Deck. Let me do this real quick. I will put it into chat. Hopefully, if this goes through, there's a link to it. So, they've got different models, but the Stream Deck is basically it's a programmable tool, a programmable keyboard that you can set to do multiple things. This is really kicking off. This is like it's the interface that allows me to really use what the program OBS is doing, which is again what allows me to create different scenes, or think of it like slides that have different aspects, right? Like when I want to bring up a picture and put it on the screen, right? These are the items that come in using OBS, but I'm activating those items with that Stream Deck. All right, Megan, are there any best practices for maintaining or updating facilitator guides, processes, procedures constantly change for us? That is a great question. Yes, there are. We're going to do a whole other session on that. It's actually one that we're looking at either my guess it would be about a month from now, end of April. The big one has to do with, basically, it's how you set up your guidebook. And I'll show you a little bit of how we do it using LeaderGuide Pro. In terms of, especially, my guess is, I'm just making an assumption here. You're making lots of changes into PowerPoints, like the change of the PowerPoints, the notes section. Now, how do we bring that back into a guidebook, things like that. So we're going to do a full on, an hour-long session on just that, because that's something we actually didn't talk about in developing guidebooks. You're really setting the system and structure and process really is about, one, it's ease of development, but the other becomes how easy is it for us to go through and make edits and revisions. And that's actually why we built out LeaderGuide Pro originally. We were a custom design house building stuff for pharmaceuticals and financial industry, and you can build amazing stuff, right, in Publisher or Canva, in a desktop publishing. But as soon as you make edits, things shift on the pages, right? Now your one change could have rippling effects through all the pages underneath that, which is why we build in Word, and then and within tables, because it's easy to manipulate tables when you make edits. But I'll have a much more in-depth thing at the end of April for that one. All right. So, obviously, if you guys got stuff to do, you got everything, those were the main things I wanted to cover today. But to see what LeaderGuide Pro can do kind of in this, let me show you that now. All right, I just need to get out of this. All right, I'm going to... The way we're going to look at this would be, and it's not the only way people build training, but I think it's the main way. I would love to see people not build out as much stuff this way, but we can't all be, we can't always get what we want. But we're going to look at it. Let's say you've got a training program that's built out mainly in PowerPoint, where we've got slides, we've got notes, right? So this is my sample slide deck. But let's look at what this would be. All right, so when we go to build out something in LeaderGuide Pro, LeaderGuide Pro is an add-in to Microsoft Word. So the nice part, at the end of the day, whatever you build out lives within Microsoft Word. You have access to everything that you need in here, right? You don't need our program to continue to have the document. So you can build stuff out. You would just lose access to what happens on the ribbon. But let's go in and let's build out a guidebook from that PowerPoint. So I'm going to come up on the ribbon. I would click on Start, which is the blank document. And it's going to give us a dialog box here where it's going to walk us through the process of building this out. So in this case, we'll just call this Sample Guidebook 321. What LeaderGuide Pro is giving us is giving us the ability to not only, build out, bring in from, in this case, integrate our slides and notes, import our slides and notes into a guidebook, but it's got a series of templates that you can customize out. We contain all the templates in what we call the collection. So you can have different collections. You can have collections for different customers. You could have them for short courses versus long courses, so that when you choose a specific collection of templates, it gives you exactly what you need for that type of guidebook. So, wrong one. On this dialog box, right, we are being prompted, and I'm zoomed in. All right, for a name, I could put a course ID where I could capture it to a LMS number or a course versioning number. I can choose, am I building a facilitator guide or a participant guide? That's just determining which templates it's looking at within the collection. The column structure, is it 2-column or 3-column, is basically determining, do you have this 3-column look or the 2-column look? The collection is our series of templates, right, where we can go through, and you can have a list as long as your arm of the ones you want. Let's say we'll use our monochrome collection. And basically when we choose this option, it goes through and it starts pulling all our individual templates together that, at some point you can go through and customize to get exactly what you want, and it starts stitching them together. Everything's in your environment, so you're able to save it. We don't have access to it unless you choose to share it with us. And then in a moment, after we saved it, it goes through, it's applying in the last few templates. We get prompted with, are you ready to add images to your document now? So, way to read this is, do we have PowerPoints, and do we want to bring in our slides and notes at this point? So we can say yes. We're going to say yes because that's what we have. But, if you had other material or you wanted to start from scratch, we could say no, and you could bring it in another way. But for today, we're just going to say yes. And now we've got a few dialog boxes walking us through the process of bringing in our slides. So it knows we're doing PowerPoint. I chose to set up as a 3-column document. So now we have a choice. Where do we want to put our slide image? Do we want it to go into column 1 versus, instead of the slide icon? It can go into column 2, or it can go into column 3. You saw, I think on the sample I just showed you, we had it in column 2. So let's put it into column 3. And then based off where we put our image will allow us to determine where do we want to put our PowerPoint notes. So because we're putting our image over into column 3, I can put my notes into column 2 or into a separate content block beneath. So I'll choose 2, and then we'll move ahead. This dialog box is walking us through, just showing us all the PowerPoints that are currently open on our system, so I can choose which one I want. And then here it's showing us which PowerPoints are available. This is showing us the slides in here, and this is actually going to walk us through putting in our course structure, our modules, and our lessons. For ease today, I've gone in and actually already put these in. But you can, using our module and lesson buttons, we can move these up and down or add them where we need them so that you can get your course structure, hopefully mapped to our learning objectives, all set up when we bring in our slides. So I'm going to just move through. And then this last dialog box is walking us through, and I'm just trying to get my chat back up so I can see it if you guys have any questions. This last one is about giving us control over image quality and formats, so you can control how large your document is, image quality for printing purposes. But the main one, what are we bringing over? Slides, just the notes. Our case will do both. And then we could go through, if and when you got into a free trial or had the license and wanted to do a new user orientation, we could go through everything else. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to just click OK. And what we'll see is, in this case, our slides come over, our notes come over based off the options that we chose. And we'll get this option about action completed successfully. So what we will end up seeing, and again, it's based off the collection. So this one's one of our out-of-the-box ones, so I haven't customized out the cover page or anything on it at the moment. But you get a cover page, and each one of these was built off an individual template that was imported in. But your acknowledgments or your copyright page, notice our table of contents was built out. And because if you took a few minutes putting in your modules and lessons when you brought in your slides, those are already in place. All right, and just so you can see, if we were to jump over to these, what you'd end up looking at is, here's this, in this case, here's a 3-column layout where you put in images over into column 3. If there was notes, they came over into column 2. But now once everything's in here, let me jump over to this here just so you can see it. I could now start manipulating my notes. Right? I could highlight what I wanted, like if this was an activity, I could put that as an activity, or I could break it out and, if I wanted, next to these notes, I wanted to give you, break it up so there was instructional cues. I'm able to quickly lay things out so that, taking my notes from PowerPoint and breaking them out into deliverable actions that I'm able to work with. So, at a high level, or at the highest level, what LeaderGuide Pro really is doing is giving us the capability to manipulate my material in a defined structure of formatting and layout that is controlled by templates that, these are all the individual pieces that are then building up into the overall course structure, which is my modules and lessons. So, obviously, this does so much more, but I just wanted to kind of showcase what it can do. And in the newest version of LeaderGuide Pro, which is, will be coming out in the not too distant future, it's in beta stages at the moment. There's actually going to be a whole interface where you can just insert in your whole document structure right off the bat, whether you're bringing in slides or notes, and it will build those out. We'll also have some predefined structures. that you can also customize out, so you're able to just, with a click of a button, and putting in your structure, have all your pages put in based off of that structure. Not all the material within it until you start bringing it in, but just you want to get all your structure into place in terms of modules and lessons, and now start working on each one of those. That's going to be a capability coming forward, which is, to me, super exciting, because structure is really the key of successful building of guidebooks. But with that, what questions do you have for me? All right. Well, if you do have questions that come up, please reach out. And actually, maybe there were ones that came in. Oh, you're welcome, Sherry. I'm glad you guys found some value in this. For April, I have to create them, put them up online, but we're going to have two. We're going to have the one that Megan was talking about editing and revising guidebooks. So that one will be towards the end of April. And towards the beginning, we're going to do one just kind of on templates itself. But probably look around, let me look at a calendar real quick. Probably second and third, or second and fourth week of April will be where those fall. I just got to work around my kids' vacation, because I don't want them to be here. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend, or your upcoming weekend, and I'll see you all soon. All right? Take care.